Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to begin in just a few minutes. My name is Dan Esty. I'm a professor in the Yale Law School and the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, and it's my great privilege to welcome you all here today to the Yale Conference of Governors on Climate Change. For those who have not been part of the program over the last day and a half, let me just share with you a little bit about what we've been up to. We are waiting, by the way, for our guests of honor to arrive, and as soon as they do, we will proceed with our program. First, we have begun to focus on the critical issue of climate change as a challenge for our country and, frankly, for the world beyond. We have with us several governors, representatives of a dozen more states, and a number of foreign countries as we think through what it's going to take to move our country towards a successful strategy of reducing greenhouse gases, and frankly, beyond that, and beyond the domestic politics of that challenge, what it takes to bring the world together in a unified effort to address this very significant policy issue. We have spent the last day and a bit talking about climate change and celebrating in particular state-level leadership on this issue. And I can't help as a professor but offer a little bit of a lesson on federalism. One of the great strengths of our country is that we have multiple layers of government. Sometimes it can be a burden. It complicates the division of responsibilities. It sometimes leads to overlaps and sometimes to gaps. But in the case that we face with climate change, I think we can be grateful that state-level leadership has provided a safety net beneath which we have protected ourselves against policy failure in Washington. And we honor today not just the current leadership of a number of states, 18 of whom have signed a declaration that we will present in a few minutes, but we honor as well the effort begun 100 years ago by President Teddy Roosevelt to engage the states in a partnership with the federal government. And his effort in the spring of 1908 was to take on the critical environmental issue of that era, the need to protect our nation's natural resources, to conserve our land, and to ensure that the great natural treasures of the United States were preserved for generations to come. And President Roosevelt's efforts not only produced a national forest service, a national park system, but an enormous number of other initiatives that have continued to serve us well to this day. Not all federal initiatives, many of them state efforts. So we honor today Teddy Roosevelt's tradition and that commitment to action that he was so famous for. We also want to focus today on the critical issue of our era, climate change, the buildup of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that threatens not only global warming, rising sea levels, changed rainfall patterns, more intense windstorms, and a host of other potential risks and threats. And we do want to honor the states that have done so much to take leadership. We will hear from Governor Rell in a few minutes about the Connecticut perspective on this. A second major goal of our conference over the last day and a half has been to begin some difficult conversations, but essential conversations, about how we unify state and federal efforts, how we ensure that the federal government learns from the state experiences in addressing this problem, and we build on the base that the states have already established. We have been talking about the best practices, the models that have been developed in a number of states, and thinking about what hasn't worked as well as what has, so that we can move forward more quickly as a nation. And of course, we want to build on that state experience not only to know what's environmentally effective, but also what's efficient and cost-effective. So we are very pleased that we've had that conversation, and you see it on the stage, a number of the state officials who've been leading the charge in their own regions of the country. A third goal of the day, and really a critical one, is to honor Yale's environmental tradition. In that effort, 100 years ago, that President Roosevelt led, he had at his side a Yale man, Gifford Pinchot, who was President Roosevelt's top advisor on issues related to environment and what they thought of at the time as land conservation. Gifford Pinchot played a number of roles, not only as a critical advisor to Roosevelt and a friend of the president's and a confidant and someone who bounced ideas back and forth with the president to develop them. But Gifford Pinchot also was the first head of the National Forest Service and played an absolutely critical role in laying a foundation for the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies that is today a leading example of an academic commitment to environmental protection broadly and a continuing commitment to forests as well. And for those who didn't see it yesterday, the spirit of commitment of the students in the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies was on beautiful display. Those of you who know the school know that above the front door of Sage Hall is a statue called Sage Boy. And Sage Boy gets decorated in ways that reflect the season. And on Valentine's Day, he may have a pink outfit, on St. Patrick's Day, green. Yesterday, he was wrapped with a VW bug and a series of comments on the challenge of stepping up to greenhouse gas emissions reduction that we face as a society. So let me honor the spirit of our students of the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies and so many others who were part of that tribute. I wanted to say that before President Levin arrived because it took the university authorities most of the morning to bring down the car that was perched precariously above the door of the school and which the public health authorities declared to be a nuisance, preventing anyone from going in or out. So that was, of course, a bit of a challenge as well. Let me say one other thing, and that is it is a great honor to be part of a Yale community that has stepped up to the climate change issue, not just in a theoretical manner, but in a practical and real way on this campus. And President Levin, who some of you know is a hard-nosed economist, has really led the charge. He's become a national leader on climate change. He's spoken out forcefully and thoughtfully about not only the importance of taking on this issue, but the fact that it can be done in a way that's economically sensible and need not be damaging to our economy. So I think it is a great privilege to be part of a university that is led by someone who is taking a strong stand and become a real leader across our society. In fact, Yale University has, over the last couple of years, reduced its greenhouse gas emissions by 17%. And that's not bad for one little university. And some of you will know that it is starting to be a real debate about how our country is going to go forward. Are we going to use a cap-and-trade allowance system? Should we move to carbon charges? Do we need some structure of old-style command and control mandates, perhaps to ensure that we step up to the issue of how to green our buildings, ensure that they're efficient, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the housing and residential sector where so much of our emissions take place? Well, I think one of the things that universities have long done, and I'm pleased to say Yale is continuing to do it, is to think not only about the policies that will be necessary to make that happen across the country, not only to design incentive structures and to build a base that the rest of the world can look at and understand as a theoretical foundation for this kind of policy intervention, but we've also tried to live it ourselves. And we have changed in a number of ways how we do business, what we do, and have put some real investments into what we are living in our own lives. So we have a biodiesel bus bringing our distinguished visitors from the President's house, and we have done so many other things to help reduce those emissions, and we have a commitment to continue to do so and to demonstrate not only the possibilities, but that there is a cost-effective way of going forward. Without any further ado, I'm going to step back and let our distinguished guests enter, and thank you all again for being with us. We are very pleased not only to have leadership in the university in the form of President Levin, but leadership in the state of Connecticut in the form of Governor Jody Rell. And it is with great privilege that I introduce her to speak.
Thank you very much, Dan. I appreciate that introduction. I have to tell all of you the closest I'm ever going to get to a Yale graduation was just now, and that was wonderful. Thank you, President Levin, of course, for the initiative today, and I have to tell you, Yale has just absolutely been wonderful in organizing and, of course, in hosting this historic summit. Your efforts are appreciated by all, and especially all of us who are sitting up here when you turn the air conditioner on in just a little while. I know it's climate change, we're not talking about air conditioning today. But in keeping with leadership shown by Yale on the issue of climate change, under your stewardship, Yale committed to the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. You also had the foresight to engage students in this important effort. In fact, because of Yale's comprehensive approach, you received the Climate Change Leadership Award last year from Connecticut Governor's Steering Committee on Climate Change. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a well-deserved honor. Congratulations. So thank you, President Levin, for all that you and Yale are doing for being such gracious hosts today. And of course, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of you as well. It's wonderful to have so many governors here today, the Canadian premiers, and so many other top leaders from states and nations. Many distinguished guests are here as well. Now, I have to make a pitch, or it wouldn't be normal, but I want you to enjoy Connecticut while you're here. I ordered the weather specifically for Governor Sebelius from Kansas said it snowed there last weekend. Don't tell her it snowed here recently as well. I want you to also get a good taste of the nutmeg hospitality, and I hope that you will all return when your schedules are not quite as condensed and compressed as they are now. Finally, I want to thank the foundation partners who worked so closely with Yale to transform what was originally just a vision into today's reality. You have been wonderful, and a special thank you to Stuart Hudson of the Tremaine Foundation. Stuart, where are you? Stand up. Now, I have to tell you that Stuart played a critical role in supporting this summit, as well as Connecticut's overall efforts to address climate change. So today, we're really here to commemorate a true milestone in our nation's efforts to preserve natural resources. And of course, that milestone is the fact that, of course, we had a president 100 years ago who said, you know what, we're going to set a new course. And our hope today is that we will continue to set a new course, have a courageous new approach to the environmental challenges of our own era. The milestone that we celebrate today, of course, is the historic meeting at the White House 100 years ago this May. In 1908, President Theodore Roosevelt convened the Conference of Governors. Just as a side note, I want to share with you that my fellow governors and I were in Washington in February, and we actually stood on the White House and had a picture taken of all of the governors today, just to show what we look like 100 years later. To all of you that wonder, there were no women, of course, in that picture 100 years ago. The men all had bushy sideburns and big mustaches. And I think Kathleen Sebelius and I stood out pretty well on that day, and it was nice to see the change and the color in that photograph as well. But joining President Theodore Roosevelt that day and at his side was Gifford Pinchot, founder of Yale School of Forestry, who later went on to serve as the first chief of the U.S. Forest Service. At that conference, a partnership was born between the states and the federal government. That partnership grew into the modern conservation movement. It also planted the seed for the remarkable system that we know as the national parks and forest. By working together, President Roosevelt and governors of that era successfully met the challenges they faced. They found a way to preserve the matchless natural resources and to continue the economic growth and prosperity that our nation needed. This is the legacy that we have been given. This is our challenge. We have inherited it, and we will do well with it. Today, we're here as a new generation. Joining us are President Roosevelt's great-grandson, Theodore Roosevelt IV. Ted, please stand. And we have Gifford Pinchot's grandson, Gifford Pinchot III. Giff, please stand. Just as those great conservationists before us, we must reach out across geographic and political divides, across state boundaries and provincial lines, and yes, across party lines as well. We seek partnerships with the federal government. We want their help in helping us to protect the fragile planet we call home and build sustainable and a prosperous 21st century economy for all of our citizens. Over the past few years, all governors and premiers, states and provinces that are represented in this room, along with many colleagues, have taken action on the issues of climate change. It's been hard and it's been a lot of work, but all of us in our own states and through the regional alliances have formed things like the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative here in the Northeast, with counterparts that are in the Western have established the Western Climate Initiative and the Midwest Greenhouse Gas Accord. The spirit of cooperation of almost 40 states, as well as several Canadian provinces and Mexican states, to form the Climate Registry, an organization that supports both voluntary and mandatory efforts to report greenhouse gas emissions. During this time, we have come to realize that we must take steps to lower carbon emissions. And like investments in energy efficiency and shift to clean, renewable energy, not just to save this planet, but also to set the foundation for a new economy. This will be a new economy that embraces innovation and new technologies, and it grows on the existing green-collar jobs and allows us to reduce dependence on foreign oil. Here in Connecticut, we have companies at the forefront of these new technologies, companies like United Technologies and General Electric. And we have training programs, and some that we've just enhanced even more this year, to help prepare our students for what we call the green-collar jobs of today and tomorrow. In Connecticut, we're determined to do more than just to sit around and acknowledge what is ahead. We are actually embracing these opportunities and this challenge that it opens for all of us for new opportunities. You know, Teddy Roosevelt once said, "Believe you can, and you're halfway there." I believe we can, and I know you do too. That is our focus, and that's what we're going to do and talk about today in our energies and our challenges. I just want to share one thing with you. It is the One Thing project that I started last summer here in Connecticut. I asked people across the state to do one thing every day to help save energy. Now, I started out doing this kind of in a funny way because I heard from someone that if you unplug your cell phone or your BlackBerry, unplug it from the wall and from the phone, and you save energy. Well, I tried it out on the first morning I was into this campaign, and it was my husband's phone. Figured he wouldn't miss it, and I unplugged it. Of course, I moved the phone. But it was the one thing that caught my attention. And what we started really has started across the state. In fact, it truly has caught on. Think about this. There are 3.5 million people in the state of Connecticut. If each of us did one thing every single day, think how many one things that really could be. That's a potential for 3.5 million one things every day. And if we each did one thing every day for a year, it's more than 2 billion one things. Now, if you're like me, you probably hear your parents' voices in the back of your head somewhere as you're walking out of a room. I grew up in Virginia. My father used to say, "I'm not supporting VEPCO, turn the lights off." Now it's whatever electric company is helping you, but it's one thing that each of us can do every day. One thing: turn the lights off, unplug the cell phone, turn off the appliance that you're not using, whatever it happens to be. The reason I bring this up to you today is because it's a positive thing. And that's what we need to focus on, how we can be positive while we're teaching people how we're going to save our planet. So enjoy this conference. You've got a lot of great speakers, and I look forward to talking with you later. Thanks, everyone.
So thank you, Governor Rell. The next part of our program is the signing of the Governor's Declaration on Climate Change being released here at Yale in New Haven, Connecticut today, committing 18 states representing more than half the U.S. population, more than half of the U.S. emissions to climate change action. This promises a real step forward, a serious step forward, a step forward in terms of reducing emissions, not in theory, but in practice, on the ground with real results. And if the states committing to action today were countries, they would be equivalent in their emissions to Britain, France, Germany, and Italy. So this is a substantial commitment from a very substantial part of the U.S. economy. The governors who are signing up today represent Republicans as well as Democrats. They're from the South as well as the North, from the East and from the West, and from the great heartland in the middle. So I think it represents more than just a commitment to action. It represents commitment to a new way forward on climate change. As Governor Rell has said, it represents bringing us together, recognizing this is an issue without partisan divide. It's an issue that will take every one of us doing our part. The declaration has 3 critical points. It commits the governors to working to ensure a workable federal-state partnership, recognizing the need for federal mandatory regulation and state-level implementation. It urges building on state experience, and of course we do have states that have led the charge, and if we're going to have an effective program and an efficient one that is cost-effective as well, we have to build on that state experience. And it talks, importantly, about getting the incentives right, recognizing that the key to policy is engaging every industry in the country and all of us as individuals in guiding the country forward in a way that makes real emissions reductions. So if I could invite Governor Rell to add her signature, that would be a great pleasure. So right here in front. Deputy, not next. I would invite them next. One after another. Yep. Governor Corzine, could I invite you to sign and briefly address the audience?
Thank you, Dan, and it is a great honor to be with all of you today. I bring greetings from the Princeton Tigers to all of you. Let me say that I think you are seeing a historic statement that whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, whether you're from the North, the South, the East, the West, that there is a challenge for all of us in our common humanity to push back against the threat of climate change. We are making a statement that together our citizens believe that we should move forward in a strong and certain way in partnership, our states, federal government, and ultimately with the globe at large. And I am very, very pleased that New Jersey is a signer of this, and we will work to make it a reality in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Corzine. Governor Sebelius.
Well, I bring you greetings from the Heartland and the championship Kansas Jayhawks. Say hello. I also want to thank Governor Rell and Yale for this wonderful opportunity to bring governors together in person, and many of us are here in spirit to join in this incredibly important initiative. 100 years ago, governors came together, as Governor Rell reminded us, with then President Theodore Roosevelt to start the great conservation movement. The steps we're taking today as governors joining together to declare our interest in taking seriously the threat of greenhouse gas emissions and taking steps toward America being a leader in this process once again are equally important for the next 100 years. So I appreciate the opportunity to be a signator from the Heartland and feel this is a critical step forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Sebelius. I also want to acknowledge a number of leaders who've joined us on the podium from Canada, from Mexico, the Deputy Prime Minister and Environment Minister of the Czech Republic. This is, again, not just a U.S. challenge, but one that will require all of us to pull together from across the globe. Thank you for your presence. So I'd like to invite our governors to come forward for a picture with President Levin. So I'd like to invite all of the podium forward, all the present, for the picture of us all together.
The whole podium group. Oh, you want the whole group? Sorry.
You want to get in front of the, you don't want the podium.
Do you want Mike, you want the front of the podium or back, or just back enough?
Squeeze together.
All right.
They will see me. Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I know. Well, some show, huh?
Put the California in front, please. Turn around here, turn. All right, thank you all very much.
See the thing you created?
Can you sign here, please?
Sure. What do you sign?
No. So Governor Schwarzenegger will now sign the petition.
Phase 2 of our program. Members of the Yale community and distinguished guests. As a resident of Connecticut, I want to thank you, Governor Rell, for all that you're doing to develop strategies to address the problem of climate change. You led Connecticut to participate in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, the first in the nation cap-and-trade program to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. You're spearheading the Climate Registry, where states can manage a common greenhouse gas emissions reporting system. And you will be implementing green building requirements next year for new public and private construction of buildings that cost more than $5 million. And this is only the beginning of your initiatives. As a citizen of the United States, I am proud of the efforts of Governors Corzine, Sebelius, and Schwarzenegger, and I'm grateful for the efforts of the commissioners and the other officials of the states represented here who have already signed onto today's declaration. The leaders from Canada, India, the Czech Republic, and Mexico who are here today reinforce by their presence the absolute necessity of global partnership to save the planet. No nation acting alone can stop global warming. As president of Yale University, I want to say what a proud day this is for our university to host this conference and to witness this declaration that calls for federal-state partnership on the issue of climate policy. You've heard, those who were here this morning, about Yale's leadership in the environmental movement for over a century. Professor Estey, who has convened this conference, was the chief negotiator for the 1992 framework, chief U.S. negotiator for the 1992 Framework Convention on Climate Change. And the dean of Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, Gus Speth, who joins us on stage, was a founder of two of the most important environmental organizations in the United States, the Natural Resource Defense Council and the World Resources Institute. It's not only the faculty at Yale who are offering environmental leadership. Students from our School of Forestry and Environmental Studies are preparing themselves for careers as stewards of our environment. But even this is not enough. Our university is an institution that is leading by example by our commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions to 10% below 1990 levels by 2020, a 43% reduction from our 2005 level. Our sustainability program at Yale begins with educating the next generation of leaders, our students, to live in better harmony with the planet than prior generations. Our aspiration is to promote growing prosperity that is sustainable in the sense that future generations will have no less opportunity to enjoy the fruits of the environment or the fruits of their own potential than we ourselves have enjoyed. I'm pleased to report that we've made real progress in our first 2 years. We have reduced our greenhouse gas emissions already by 17% from our 2005 levels. And we have underway additional projects that will cut another 17% in 3 years. At this rate, we will reach our goal well in advance of the deadline that we set for ourselves. And we're demonstrating that the reduction of our carbon footprint is not only feasible, but affordable. We estimate that we can achieve our targeted reductions at a cost of less than 1% of our operating expenses, perhaps no more than 0.5%. And who among us would not be willing to pay a tax of 0.5% to save the planet? Yale has made an institutional effort to signal the dangers of global warming and to take action to prevent it. We hope that institutions can make a difference, but we all know that it is ultimately individuals who make the biggest difference, leaders who awaken and inspire us all. We are fortunate today to have two such inspirational leaders to address us. So let me proceed to introduce the first of these, my distinguished friend and colleague, Rajendra Pachauri. Mr. Pachauri is one of the world's leading environmentalists. He has spent his life helping to save our planet. He is chairman of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, an international organization that seeks to combat global warming. In 2007, the IPCC presented the most convincing scientific evidence to date of the direct relationship between global warming and human activity. The panel's assessment of the human contribution to global warming has been accepted and endorsed by governments and scientific bodies of more than 150 nations. As a result of Mr. Pachauri's leadership, the IPCC was a co-recipient of the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize, a major recognition that the peace and prosperity of the world depends upon protecting the planet. Since its formation, the IPCC has been a leading voice promoting awareness of the impact of climate change. Mr. Pachauri authored the second IPCC report in 1995, which laid much of the foundation of the Kyoto Agreement in 1997. We all hope that the fourth report, released last year, will play a similar role as the foundation for a successor agreement in Copenhagen in 2009. Yale prides itself on being a global university. We're reaching out to all parts of the world to disseminate information, to educate our students and the students from other countries, to carry out research that will advance our understanding of the human and natural world. Increasingly, we understand that being part of a global university means caring for the globe itself, and that we must educate the next generation of leaders to do the same. Mr. Pachauri is helping us do that by the example he sets in his own organization and by the wise counsel and instruction he has and will continue to offer on this campus. In partnership with Dean Gus Speth, he's been instrumental in creating Yale's strong connection to his home institution, the Energy and Resources Institute, where he serves as Director General. The collaboration has been a cornerstone of Yale's presence in India, and it emphasizes the teaching, training, and research in areas of energy, climate change, and carbon sequestration, environmental law and policy, joint forest and watershed management, and industrial ecology. He has been a frequent guest on our campus, and we're so pleased that he'll be back again in the fall, once again, to teach our students. Please join me in welcoming Rajendra Pachauri. Thank you.
President Levin, honorable governors, my good friends, Dean Gus Speth and Professor Dan Estey, I feel very humbled here with leaders who have achieved so much, and all I've done is basically to have been responsible for the production of the fourth assessment report of the IPCC and to have, in my own humble way, spread the message in different parts of the world. But I salute President Levin for the initiative that he's taken in making Yale a leader in actually doing what really the whole world should be doing. And I certainly owe a debt of gratitude to Governor Schwarzenegger and Governor Rell, because they have done things that have certainly made my life much easier, in the sense that whenever I go, I'm asked by the media what I think about the actions of the United States administration. And as a stateless person, and the reason why I'm a stateless person is because I travel so much from one state to the other and barely spend any time there, I'm always able to provide comfort by saying, look at California, look at Connecticut, look at some of the states in the US, and don't worry about what the administration says. That certainly saves my skin, because otherwise I'd have to say something critical about the administration and get into trouble for doing that. So, well, let me start by saying that climate change by itself is part of a much larger problem. The problem essentially is that in our drive towards industrialization and being able to provide more and more goods and services to human society, we have actually pursued a path of development which is unsustainable. It's unsustainable because we have been consuming natural resources and have been deriving the services of the ecosystems and natural resources in a manner that clearly has not been able to replenish what we have consumed. And in the case of climate change, we know that industrialization has brought with it excessive consumption of fossil fuels excuse me, and the production of several other greenhouse gases, which have taken us to a level where climate change is not merely scientific theory. It's something which we can observe now. The observations are so strong that it would be really someone totally naive or unable to see things around him to say that climate change is merely a myth. If we look at the observations before us, and we have brought this out clearly in the fourth assessment report of the IPCC, the average increase in temperature during the 20th century has been 0.74 degrees Celsius. This, incidentally, is much higher than what we had estimated earlier in the third assessment report, where our estimate was 0.6 degrees Celsius. Sea level rise during the century rose on an average 17 centimeters. And if you look at the warmest years in history, if we classify 12 of the warmest years since instrumental records have been maintained across the globe, 11 of the 12 warmest have occurred in the last 12 years. So it would be fair to conclude that the rate of warming is on an increase. But climate change is not something that's a simple, straight, linear relationship. It's something that's accompanied by a large number of other changes, which essentially include changes in precipitation levels. In general, at the upper latitudes, precipitation has been increasing. In fact, I remember 4 years ago, there was a major conference in Moscow called the World Climate Change Conference, where President Putin spoke and opened the conference. And he read out a text which was quite uninspiring, and everybody thought Russia is not going to ratify the Kyoto Protocol. Then Klaus Topfer, he was the head of UNEP at that point of time, the then executive secretary of the UN Framework Convention, and I spoke in succession. And I talked about the impacts of climate change on the developing countries. And then President Putin did this, and he wanted to speak again. This time, he spoke without any notes. And he says, everybody tells me that climate change is good for Russia because we won't have to spend so much on fur coats. And that several areas will open up and our agriculture will prosper. He said, but I have to worry about floods, I have to worry about droughts, and I certainly have to worry about all of these happenings in the rest of the world. And I felt his body language conveyed the fact that Russia would ratify the Kyoto Protocol. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because with this increase in precipitation, those, and I've discussed this with people from Siberia, those in Siberia who feel that happy days are ahead would be disillusioned because there would be so much more snowfall that in effect life would become much more difficult. So climate change is not something that's a smooth, linear increase in temperatures. It involves, as we know now, much different precipitation patterns. Certainly many more extreme precipitation events. That means in short periods of time, you'll get large quantities of rainfall, as has been happening in several parts of the globe. Much more floods, much more droughts, and more severe floods and more severe droughts. There would be, therefore, a major change in the availability of water in different parts of the world. Coming as I do from the Indian subcontinent, we know that the glaciers are melting at such a rapid rate that the flow in our river systems, at least in the northern part of the subcontinent, will be severely affected. And this, we have estimated in the IPCC, will influence the lives of 500 million people in South Asia and 250 million people in China. So we have some serious problems that are part of this process of human-induced climate change. There are also impacts on agriculture. And the net effect of climate change on agriculture would be one that would essentially lead to a decline in yields and productivity. And I don't have to remind you about the seriousness of this problem because you know what's happening around the world today. Food prices have gone up, demand is increasing, supply has not kept pace, and therefore, as a result, in some of the poorest countries in the world, you have demonstrations, you have riots, and people who are going hungry. This, I'm afraid, is going to increase in the future. And there's no part of the globe that can remain immune to the danger that's inherent in these problems and these situations. So the impacts of climate change overall are going to become much more severe, including the impacts on human health. Now, some of these will occur because there would be much greater vector-borne diseases in different parts of the world because these vectors are going to be able to survive in the revised climatic conditions that we are going to deal with. But there would also be more floods, more droughts, and certainly more heat waves. I don't have to remind you about what happened in 2003 in France, and other parts of Europe, where 30,000 people lost their lives as a result. And this, incidentally, in the developing countries is a very normal occurrence. But you don't normally read about it simply because it doesn't hit the headlines. So health and mortality and morbidity would be much more of a problem in the future. Our projections indicate that by the end of the 21st century, average temperature increase at the lower end of the scenarios that we have assessed would be 1.8 degrees Celsius. And at the upper end, we have a best estimate of 4 degrees Celsius. Now, even the lower end is something that clearly the human race cannot accept, because combined with the 0.74 degree increase that took place in the 20th century, this would represent a total increase since industrialization began of over 2.5 degrees Celsius. What would happen at this range of 2.5 degrees Celsius? Well, agriculture, we know now, we have enough evidence, will be severely affected. There's a danger of several species being endangered and perhaps being driven to extinction. The IPCC has assessed a large number of species, and we find that 20 to 30% of these species are at danger of extinction at temperatures above 1.5 to 2.5 degrees Celsius. Another important issue that we need to be concerned about is the possibility of abrupt and irreversible changes. I've already mentioned the danger to species, but another particularly dangerous and severe consequence that we might see is going to result from the possible collapse of the ice sheet in Greenland and West Antarctica. Now, these are large bodies of ice that are sitting on land, and therefore, if they were to collapse, the extent of increase in sea level could be several meters. And that clearly means that we as a species would have succeeded in changing the geography of this planet. And it certainly would put at risk several hundreds of millions of people in the small island states, in countries like Bangladesh, even parts of North America, which are low-lying. They would clearly be affected as a result of the kind of sea level rise that would occur. Now, one important part of the Framework Convention on Climate Change is the central objective of preventing dangerous anthropogenic or human interference with the climate system. The big question is, what represents dangerous? And we in the IPCC have been asked that question frequently. But unfortunately, the answer to that has to be based on value judgments. Science can only assist in arriving at this conclusion. And science can tell you that at certain temperature levels, with certain levels of climate change, we are likely to get a whole range of consequences in terms of impacts of climate change. But then it's for the negotiator, it is for the policymakers to decide what they should term as dangerous. And here, may I say that the definition of what is dangerous depends on whose perspective you are reflecting. If you talk to the president of the Maldives, as indeed I have done, he'll tell you that that danger point was exceeded several years ago. In 1997, the IPCC had a meeting in the Maldive Islands, and the president of Maldives, President Gayoom, stood before us. And he says, ladies and gentlemen, the place where you're holding this meeting 10 years ago was under 1.5 feet of water. Because you don't have to wait for these small island states and low-lying areas to be inundated by the sea. The danger is present the moment you find sea level has reached a certain magnitude. Any storm surge, any cyclone, any such event will produce a devastating effect. In particular, the mega deltas across the world are very vulnerable, and this includes cities like Shanghai, Kolkata, and Dhaka. I was in China last week, and I spoke at the Boao Forum, and when I told the Chinese that Shanghai is in danger, they certainly felt a bit uncomfortable because this is the shining example of modern China. And if that's endangered, then there's something for them to worry about. Now, I really don't want to go into this story of creating a scare, but I do want to emphasize that science tells us very clearly now that with the changes that are taking place, there is clearly the threat to peace and stability. And I suppose the Norwegian Nobel Committee realized that when they awarded last year's Nobel Peace Prize to the IPCC and Mr. Al Gore. We know, however, that in the event of these changes, we will have to adapt to climate change because there's a certain inertia in the system by which even if we were to stabilize the concentration of these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere at today's level, climate change will continue for several decades. So some countries and some regions have no choice but to urgently implement adaptation measures. And I think the global community has to help these societies simply because they are the most underprivileged and the poorest regions of the world. But that will in itself not be enough. We really need to mitigate the emissions of greenhouse gases because unless we do that, the impacts will become so severe that it will exceed the capacity of human society to be able to adapt to the kinds of changes that we're going to see. As it happens, the good news is that mitigation is not an expensive proposition. As indeed we have seen in the case of the states that are represented by the governors over here. We in the IPCC have assessed several scenarios for stabilization, and one of them, just to mention some details, would essentially stabilize temperature increase at 2 to 2.4 degrees Celsius. What would this imply? Well, firstly, that all we have is a short window of 7 years. Emissions globally will have to peak by 2015 and then decline thereafter. So that gives us a very short period of time. That's why it's so critical that in 2009, we got a firm and forward-looking agreement that helps to bring down the emissions of greenhouse gases as required. And if people tell you that the cost of mitigation is going to be very high, then I think they need to be disputed, because if you look at the cost of mitigation and the scenario that I just mentioned to you, In 2030, the total cost to the global economy will be less than 3% of the GDP. Certainly not a high price to pay for avoiding all the dangerous impacts and damage that might take place in the future. And what's more important is that these mitigation measures carry with them a whole range of so-called co-benefits: energy security, lower levels of air pollution, better health benefits, in some areas, rural jobs being created. All of this, once you add it together, might actually give you negative costs. That means society may actually benefit by taking these measures. So the myth that there would be a loss of jobs and economic output needs to be exploded, and indeed our numbers clearly explode that. May I now end by putting before you a few thoughts which I think are critical from the point of view of the US. We need leadership. The US has been a leader in several areas where democratic initiatives are involved. But today, may I say very candidly, it bothers me that the prestige that the US had acquired through all these years of practice of democracy and concern for the rest of the world is being severely questioned, and is certainly not at the level where it was. It's a good thing, as I mentioned at the outset, that we have governors, we have state leadership that's really showing us the way. But there is a need for the country as a whole to move forward. In this respect, may I say that even companies that have the wisdom to see that the world is going to move towards a low-carbon future and are therefore investing in technologies that are low in carbon intensity are going to be winners. Those who lag behind will certainly be losers. And this argument also applies to countries. Those countries which are prepared to take the leadership, and therefore all the businesses and industry located in those countries will turn out to be winners. And those who are left behind will obviously lose prestige, global influence, and perhaps even market opportunities in the world of the future. Now, we are told that technology is going to provide the answers. Yes, undoubtedly. But technology can only follow what policies require. And in order to bring about technological change and the development and dissemination of technologies that will solve the problem, you need a set of policies. Most importantly, you need a price on carbon. If there is a price on carbon, companies will have the incentive to invest in R&D and develop low-carbon solutions. If you don't have such a price, then clearly the market is not going to move towards a low-carbon future. You can certainly assist this through fiscal measures, could be incentives, disincentives, regulation, but ultimately, if we're looking for solutions, then the market has to be harnessed and the power of the market has to provide some of these solutions. May I also say that lifestyle changes are going to be important. Now, this is something which is not a popular thing to voice. And I remember in Bangkok, when we released the Working Group 3 report, there was a press conference at the end. And I was asked, what kind of lifestyle changes does the IPCC recommend? So I had to clarify that firstly, the IPCC doesn't recommend anything. It only assesses various options. It's for you to adopt what you want. But I said, if you ask a personal opinion, I would submit that people should eat less meat. I said, you'll be healthier and so would the planet. But I might confess that didn't make me very popular with my Latin American colleagues. However, I'm only giving that as an example. There are other things that we should really be doing. Governor L told us about the importance of ensuring that we have the minimal amount of air conditioning that's essential for human comfort. There are means by which we can cut down on lighting. There are means by which we can cut down on our transportation demand. But in general, as she suggested, if we can think of one thing every day by which we reduce our carbon footprint, then there'll be such a collective and cumulative action and such an outcome of all these efforts that I think we would move in the right direction. Now, I've talked essentially at the global level. Let me say something finally on what I believe the developing countries should do. I come from a developing country, and I've been telling everyone, right from the top leadership downwards, that the developing countries should not emulate what the developed countries have done. We certainly would be repeating their mistakes if we were to do the same thing. And in recognition of this fact, and in order to practice what one preaches, I've personally launched a program that I call Lighting a Billion Lives. I find it a source of anguish and deep disappointment that in this day and age, in the 21st century, we have 1.6 billion people who don't have access to modern forms of energy or electricity. And 400 million of them live in India. Now, we can wait for coal-fired power plants, we can provide kerosene, we can provide all kinds of fuels for these people to get lighting in their lives. Firstly, that's going to take a long time. Secondly, I'm not too sure those are sustainable and environmentally clean solutions. So in my institute, we've developed a solar lantern and a solar flashlight. And each of these can be provided to the poorest of people. I want to mention just one example. In villages in Sundarbans, which is the deltaic region of the river Ganges, the Ganga River, you've got a number of islands which have no electricity. What we've done is we have trained a woman in each village with a solar panel on her roof. She charges about 50 lanterns during the day and rents them out in the evening to all the people in the village. The result is she's got a job, she's earning an income, everyone has a durable and sustainable form of lighting, and those who had cottage enterprise in their homes are now working longer hours because of the light, and children can read and study. So I think we need to think out of the box. And this can be done collaboratively. This can be done in partnership between developed and developing countries. Because after all, we all live on one planet, and we have to face the challenge together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pachauri, for those informative and inspiring remarks. And now it is an honor and a very special pleasure for me to introduce Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm a native Californian. Long ago, I was lured here by the irresistible attractions of this place and have never gone home. But I've long had a special pride in seeing California play a leadership role among the states in protecting the environment. It's a long tradition. And that pride has been reinforced and strengthened by Governor Schwarzenegger's actions to confront and contain global warming. His administration pressed the Environmental Protection Agency either to take action to address greenhouse gas emissions or to get out of the way and let the state of California do it. My home state was one of the 12 that forced the issue of whether the EPA has the authority to regulate greenhouse gases, and they won at the United States Supreme Court. California was the first state to mandate an enforceable economy-wide cap on greenhouse gas emissions. Governor Schwarzenegger has committed California to cutting CO2 emissions to 1990 levels by 2020, a 25% reduction. And California is aiming for an 80% reduction by 2050. Governor Schwarzenegger is a thoughtful and committed champion of the environment. He speaks directly and eloquently about leaving the world better than our generation found it. He understands intuitively that green technologies will create jobs and strengthen our economy, and that markets for carbon trading can succeed, and that the economy of the state of California, like the rest of the country, is robust enough to absorb the cost of a carbon cap and trade system. By protecting the environment and exhorting others to do the same, Governor Schwarzenegger continues in the tradition of Theodore Roosevelt, whom we remember today. His administration exemplifies one of the strengths of the American federal form of government, one that leaves states free to experiment and to push the boundaries of public policy. As enthusiastic as I am about experimentation and initiative that we are seeing in California and in other states, there is one serious limitation to state-level initiatives. They don't provide a uniform national approach that would give certainty for consumers and businesses, nor would they ensure that individual states are on a level playing field in the carbon economy. For that, we need indispensably national legislation, which I hope will be enacted soon. Thank you. California is demonstrating that we can adopt measures to avert global warming without excessive adverse economic consequences. In that sense, Governor Schwarzenegger is not merely leading California, but he is setting an example for the nation and the world to follow. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Thank you very much, President Levin, for the wonderful introduction. And let me just say right off the top, I'm very happy that I'm not the only one with an accent speaking here today. Anyway, it's great to all have you, Dr. Pachauri. Thank you for the wonderful speech. It was really extraordinary. And I want to thank also Governor Jody Rail for being here today, and all the other governors that came and premiers that came down from Canada. We want to thank also Mary Nichols, who is the chair of the California Air Resources Board, who is with us here today, sitting in the front row. Thank you very much. We want to thank Premier Charest for being here from Quebec, and also we want to thank Professor Dan Estey for being really responsible for organizing this and for having me here today. And he has been a great advisor to our administration for the last 4 years. So we want to thank you for all your great work and for being such a great leader. And I also want to thank one of our my great advisors, environmental advisors, Terry Tamminen, for being here today. I don't know where Terry is, but oh yeah, he's right here. Terry, get up. It's really great to be here today with all of you and to be here at Yale. Earlier, I don't know if you know, but President Levin and I, we created a little bit of action. We went over to the gym and we worked out already. I had no idea that he was that buff, to be honest with you. He bench pressed a sophomore, which was really extraordinary. But anyway, it is great to be here today. And I know that this is an environmental conference to mark Teddy Roosevelt's 1908 Yale Governors Conference. And it is an extraordinary event here to celebrate this. But even though it's an environmental conference, I would like to start talking about bodybuilding. Now you see how everyone is waking up now. I like that. Now the reason is because there's something in common, the image that bodybuilding had and the image that environmentalists have. In the old days, when I came over here 40 years ago to America, people worked out with weights, but they were embarrassed to admit it, to talk about bodybuilding, saying that they're bodybuilder, they worked out with weights, because they were embarrassed about it, and especially big stars in Hollywood, like Kirk Douglas and Clint Eastwood and Charles Bronson and those guys. They would not want to be associated with the dungeons where those weird guys, those fanatics, trained. So they always, when they were asked, how did you get this body? They would say, well, we were born like this. But then slowly the image changed because a book, Pumping Iron, came out. And then the movie Pumping Iron came out. As a matter of fact, we have the director sitting right here. Where's our director? George Butler is sitting right here. Give him a big hand. And that explained the sport a little bit, and then all of a sudden we won all the covers of magazines and in newspapers and on television, and I started promoting the sport all over the United States and all over the world, and the sport became more and more popular. And eventually the perception of bodybuilding began to change, and today there are gymnasiums everywhere. And everywhere you can go to a gymnasium anywhere, and normal people will be talking about their abs and their delts and serratus and the six-pack and all of those kind of things. It's quite normal. So the sport has arrived. Now, like bodybuilders, environmentalists were thought also to be kind of weird fanatics. You know, the kind of serious tree huggers and weeping willows. Plus, environmentalists were no fun, that they were like prohibitionists at the fraternity party and stuff like that. And for too long, environmental movement was powered by guilt. Now, you know the kind of guilt that I'm talking about: smokestacks, belching pollution to power our hot tubs and large screen TVs, or in my case, flying around with a private plane or driving my big Hummers. Now, it's too bad that we all can live simple lives like Buddhist monks on straw mats. But you know something? It's not going to happen. Let's face it, people are not going to give up their energy-burning plasma TVs. Maybe if the TV or the computer or the cell phone or the appliance would have a little smokestack on it that shows you that how much energy you use or how much greenhouse gas emissions there are, maybe you would make the people feel a little bit more guilty, but I doubt it. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think that any movement has ever made it and has ever made much progress based on guilt. Guilt is passive, it is inhibiting, it's defensive, and the approach just simply doesn't work. Successful movements are built on passion. They're built on confidence, they're built on Teddy Roosevelt's bully pulpit. They're built on critical mass, and often they're built on an element of alarm that galvanizes action. I believe the environmental movement is switching over from being powered by guilt to being powered by something much more positive, something much more dynamic, something much more capable of bringing about revolutionary change. Its image is also changing from one of hand-wringing and whining to that is more hip, an image that is cutting-edge, forceful, and self-confident, and even sexy. And a big boost is coming after the election, no matter whether it's McCain or Obama or Clinton, but it is something we're going to talk about a little bit later. In California, we are, of course, doing everything that we can to change the balance of power on the environment. First, let me start with government policy. Now, of course, the big thing is we don't wait for Washington, because as I've always said, Washington is asleep at the wheel. Now, I don't want to go into all the details of all the laws that we have passed and all the regulations and all of the things that we have done, but I want to mention some of the things because we are very proud of what we have accomplished. As a matter of fact, when we started, and I said that you can't protect the environment and the economy at the same time, people said it was impossible. But then when I came into office, we started getting to work, and we started building the hydrogen highway, and we set aside 25 million acres of pristine land with the Sierra Nevada Conservancy. Then we put in place the Ocean Action Plan that led the nation in cleaning and preserving our coastline. And we also began our Green Building Initiative to make our government buildings more energy efficient by 25% by the year 2015. Then we did something very important, which was we passed the Million Solar Roof Initiative in order to harness the renewable energy of the sun. And then there were two things that we have done, two laws that we have passed. They got world recognition, and that is to pass the law to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by the year 2020, which is rolling back the greenhouse gas emissions to the 1990 level, and then an additional 80% by the year 2050. And then the following year, thank you. And then the following year, we passed and we ordered a cut in the carbon content of transportation fuels, the low carbon fuel standards. Now, like I said, this gave us world attention. Now, do I believe that those standards that California sets will solve global warming? No, not at all. What we are doing is basically applying leverage so that at some point the whole environmental thing tilts and shifts. It's like a seesaw. You go up and eventually it tilts down the other way. California is, as you know, the 7th largest economy in the world, and it is a big state, it's a powerful state, and what we do does have consequences. Now, even though when you look at the globe, California is a little spot on that globe, but when it comes to our power of influence, it is an equivalent of a whole continent. Now, when California passed its Global Warming Act, may I remind you, we were totally alone. There was no one out there doing the same thing, because as I said, Washington didn't lead. But we started forming partnerships with Western states, with Northeastern states, and with Canadian provinces, and with European nations, as a matter of fact, with all European nations. And then 600 American cities have signed on to be part of the Kyoto Treaty. So America has to lead, and we are doing so even without Washington. Now, thank you. Now, things were going really well, and there's great progress being made, but not everything goes smoothly. There are stumbling blocks along the way. Like, for instance, a year or so ago, there was a billboard in Michigan that accused me of costing the car industry $85 billion because of our new emission standards. The billboard said, "Arnold to Michigan, drop dead." But that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, Arnold to Michigan, get off your butt. That's what I'm saying. As a matter of fact, California may be doing more to save the US auto industry than anyone else, because we are pushing them to change, so that if they want to sell their cars in the Golden State, they should change the technology. But government by itself cannot get us where we need to go. I'm a big believer in American technology, and I think that the technology is what eventually will save Detroit and will save the environment. Like, we have seen over and over people talking about how bad the big jets are and how bad the big cars are, but that's not where the action is, what the size of something is. The action is in technology. A perfect example is, for instance, we in California have a car company called Tesla Motors, where the Tesla Roadster is 100% electric. Now, this car goes from 0 to 60 in 4 seconds, and it drives 140 miles an hour. As a matter of fact, President Levin, you need to have one of those cars, I'm telling you, because the girls will go crazy when they see you in this car. I know you will be excited about that. Anyway, the Tesla Roadster goes 250 miles on a charge, and then it only takes 3.5 hours to charge it up. Now, of course, there's a downside, because the first version of that car will cost $100,000, but the second one will come down to $80,000, and the third version will be $50,000. So economics tells you where this is heading. It's just like with the cell phones. 20 years ago, I bought a cell phone, which was kind of a radio phone, and it cost $1,600. Then eventually it went down to $1,000 to $500, and the last phone I bought for my daughter was only $90. So today, cell phones are everywhere because of the costs coming down. And the same thing will happen with environmental technologies. But government, as I said, cannot do it all, but government can give a push by setting the standards. So California is giving the nation and the world a push. And this is why UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon came to me a year ago and asked me to do a keynote speech at the United Nations in order to talk there about what California is doing and to give the rest of the world a push, because there were 190 some countries sitting there, and we try to inspire them to go in the same direction as California is. Now, of course, beyond government policy, a second factor is economic. California is the leading edge of what I call the environmental economy, which is green, clean technology. Right now, in California's university labs, corporate research parks, even in strip mall offices, something very exciting is happening. The nation's brightest scientists and the smartest venture capitalists are racing racing to find new technologies for alternative energy. And now this is a race that is literally fueled by billions and billions of dollars. And when it comes to developing green tech in California, everyone is drinking Red Bull. I can tell you that. Even the most optimistic forecasters say that we only have 40 or 50 years of oil left. As a matter of fact, with the thirst that we see in India, that India has and that China has, I think those years are even less. So there's a huge pressure, besides global warming, to push in the direction of finding new sources of energy. So capitalism, long the alleged enemy of the environment, is today giving new life to the environmental movement. In fact, the environmental cause would be unwinnable without capitalism and the technology it will provide. As a matter of fact, the head of PG&E, California's largest utility, says that the energy industry is on the brink of a revolution. General Electric, based right here in Connecticut, sold its plastic business because it saw more potential for growth and profit in environmental goods and services. So you can see the shift is happening. And the shift is not only happening here in America, we see it all over the world. I saw the other day that a leading German consulting firm predicted that by the end of the next decade, more people will be employed in Germany's green, clean technology industry than in the auto industry. So as you can see, this is not a fairy tale. We have had the Industrial Revolution, the Technological Revolution, the Global Revolution, and next is the Environmental Revolution. Now I see some people looking at me funny and saying, what happened to the sexual revolution? Well, we're going to talk about that the next time I come here, I promise you. So anyway, the third thing that I want to mention is the attitude of the public, the politicians, and also the special interests. The geopolitics of global climate change has been deadlocked. We all know that. The US says that China and India should be covered by carbon limits, and China and India is saying that we should go first because we were the biggest polluters in the world. But I think that the deadlock is about to be broken. President McCain, President Obama, President Clinton, I think will all shift this country into a much higher gear when it comes to climate change. As a matter of fact, I'm very happy to say that all three candidates will be great for the environment. So things will immediately pick up speed after the inauguration day. I know that for sure. But let me tell you something that will surprise you. I don't know if many of you know, but I'm sure you do know that cable TV show called Mythbusters. Do you know that show? Where there's two funny, weird guys go around and trying to see if various different myths are actually true. Like dropping from 100 feet into water, does it have the same impact as dropping from 100 feet onto concrete or cement? Or if you drop a penny from the Empire State Building and it hits then below someone on the head, does that penny really go through someone's skull? That's the kind of crazy things that they try to prove. And I love their dummy that they're using. I mean, he's really getting beaten up. He should actually go into politics. That's what I suggest. Well, I got a myth for those guys to investigate, because we hear all the time that businesses and Republicans are the obstacle to progress on renewable energy and on greenhouse gases, while the environmental activists and Democrats are absolutely perfect and create no obstacle at all. Well, I say this is a myth. First, major companies like DuPont and GE and Walmart and BP are convinced of the need for change. And mainstream Republicans are finally coming around too. They realize that green, clean technology creates jobs, extra revenues, and stimulates the economy. But the important point I want to make is that environmental activists and Democrats many times are just as much an obstacle in moving forward. Rhetorically, of course, they love to talk about renewable energy and geothermal and wind and solar and all those kind of things. But many times we have seen they're trying to slow down the approval process. It's kind of a schizophrenic behavior. They say that we want renewable energy, but we don't want you to put it anywhere, and we don't want you to use it. One energy expert the other day said that the California Mojave Desert which is a vast space with thousands of square miles, is one of the best spots on planet Earth for solar power plants. Pacific Gas and Electric wants to put 3 huge solar plants right there. And the whole world, the Germans, the French, the Canadians, and the Japanese, they all want to come out to California and put the solar power plants in the Mojave Desert and in other places. The only thing is that the problem is that getting that new energy to the power grid because of environmental hurdles. San Diego Gas and Electric wants to develop solar geothermal fields in Imperial Valley and build 150 miles of transmission lines to go and take this power right into San Diego. But it faces opposition even though it would replace an old carbon-based power plant. So the point I'm making is it's not just businesses that have slowed things down. It's not just Republicans that have slowed things down. It's also Democrats and it's also environmental activists sometimes that slow things down. And even my own agency that I'm supposed to be the head of and the boss of, I found out is slowing things down. Now, this gets very complicated, I tell you. For example, our Department of Fish and Game is slowing approval of a solar facility in Victorville. It's because of an endangered squirrel. An endangered squirrel which has never been seen on that land where they're supposed to build the solar plants. But if such a squirrel were around, this is the kind of area that it would like, they say. Now, the department wants the power company to buy 3 acres of land to protect these little creatures for every acre of solar land that is being used, so that the squirrel could be safe if it exists. So a squirrel that may not exist is holding up environmental progress on a larger and more pressing fight against global warming. What we have here is a case of environmental regulations holding up environmental progress. I don't know whether this is ironic or absurd, but I mean, if we cannot put solar power plants in the Mojave Desert, I don't know where the hell we can put it, I tell you honestly. This is, ladies and gentlemen, Ladies and gentlemen, this is the real world. We have to make some trade-offs. I think both the environmental activists and their opponents cannot let perfect become the enemy of possible. Because the fact of the matter is, nothing is perfect. Solar still needs transmission lines, battery electric cars still need chemicals in the batteries and electricity to recharge them. Hydrogen cars still need a fuel currently made largely from natural gas. Nuclear power, which is very clean, but still has waste that must be stored somewhere. Biofuels from corn-based ethanol and palm oil still needs to be controlled so we don't have deforestation all over the world. So as one of my environmental friends and advisors said, that there is no silver bullets, only silver buckshot. We need to find creative ways to overcome those obstacles. There's no 2 ways about it. Neither business, nor environmentalists, nor Republicans, nor Democrats can be set in their ways. I suggest to them, relax, exhale. Just exhale and relax and let things move forward. And what is so great about this conference, for instance, here is there's a lot of young people. And I always found that young people are more open to new ways of thinking. So I urge you to continue to be open-minded on our environment. Do not dismiss, do not accept an idea because it has a Republican label or a Democratic label, a conservative label, or a liberal label. Think for yourself. This is especially true on environment. So I have great faith in your ability to find new answers and to find new approaches. Don't accept what the old people say. Don't accept what the old ways, don't accept the old ways or the old politics of Democrats and Republicans. Stir things up. Be fresh and new the way you look at things. I believe in what you can accomplish. Now, a lot of people are pessimistic about the environmental problems. And yes, there are a lot of obstacles, but I am optimistic. I'm very optimistic. Earlier I mentioned that one of the things that propels a successful movement is when it reaches critical mass. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you can feel the big things moving. You can feel the big things coming together. You can feel the momentum. I say, do not be downhearted about the environment. Every day I see what is happening in California, and I tell you, my fellow environmentalists, things are about to move our way. Thank you very much for having me here, and thank you for your hospitality. Thank you.